Michael B. Jordan battles Jonathan Majors in Creed 3. Jason Statham, Aubrey Plaza, and Bugsy Malone are spies working for the British government in Operation Fortune Ruse de Guerre, and the children go on a violent, murderous rampage against the adults in the new Children of the Corn reboot. All this and more is being released this weekend. Hello guys, I am the Hick Critic here bringing you my opinions of the films that were just released. As always, keep in mind, these are my own personal opinions. Feel free to check out any of the films that seem interesting to you. Alright guys, let's dive right in. Our first film tonight is Creed 3, the newest film in the Rocky Creed universe, and the very first one to not feature Rocky Balboa at all. And while this isn't quite a TKO, it definitely goes the distance. Adonis Creed, played by Michael B. Jordan, is enjoying his retirement, spending time with his wife and daughter, played by Tessa Thompson and Mila Davis Kent, respectively, and working to train up for the next generation of boxers. However, an old childhood friend of Donnie's, Damien, played by Jonathan Majors, has come back into his life after having served 18 years in prison, and he wants a shot in the ring. Circumstances cause the once close friends to become estranged and hostile to each other, and to settle the score, Adonis may have to return to the ring one last time, but first he must confront his own past. Creed 3 is kind of a mishmash of ideas from both Rocky 3 and Rocky 5, so I guess it would be fair to say that this one isn't exactly the most original film out there. I mean, that is to be expected. This franchise has a definite formula, and it doesn't really stray too far from it. So, yeah, if you're sick of the Rocky formula, then that is going to be kind of a problem. But, in all honesty, if you've been following Creed's story up to this point and you liked the first two like I did, then I think you'll like this one. The characters are just as good as they've been up to this point, and their actors continue to excel, particularly Michael B. Jordan and Tessa Thompson. Jonathan Majors is also really great in this film as the childhood friend turned enemy, as he plays a character who you can just sense in almost every scene he's in, the rage and anger that he feels from being locked away for so long, and because of Adonis having what he feels like should be his. And the film goes to great lengths to explore the themes of guilt and forgiveness, both for others and for yourself, and the dangers of refusing to let the past go. And it all unfolds very organically. This doesn't feel like a case where you feel like this conflict could have been easily avoided. It feels like something that was unavoidable, and the actions that the characters take leading up to it flow well. This is Michael B. Jordan's directorial debut, and he actually does a really good job here. Aside from an occasional out-of-focus shot, he is exceptionally good behind the camera. Based on this one movie alone, he's kind of what I would describe as subtly showy. There's a couple of really cool moments that are thrown in there to showcase his talent, but the film also doesn't draw attention to them. One choice that was made by him that was really interesting and added its own flair to this film's fighting scenes in particular, and that's the way that he films certain punches. Like, the camera will linger in slow motion on punches as they collide, and sweat is going to leap off of their bodies. And it's done in kind of like a stylized manner, but not so much that it feels out of place. And it didn't occur to me while I was watching it, but I found out later that Jordan took inspiration from anime for directing the fight scenes, and it does help give this film's fighting its own unique flair. But by far the most unique thing about this film was the way it presented the final boxing match. I'm not sure I really want to give it away more than that, but once you see it in the film, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The way it was shot, it really did a fantastic job at emphasizing just how personal the fight was between these two. Whoever made that decision, it was a great decision, and Michael B. Jordan did a fantastic job at conveying the emotion of the moment. So the characters are well written, the themes work and stem naturally from the plot, the acting's all good, and the fight scenes are pretty unique. My biggest reservations largely come from the slightly underwritten screenplay. There are a couple of elements that I felt definitely could have been done better. One set of characters kind of disappears from the story completely after about the halfway point. I mean, they briefly reappear for like 2 quick shots during the final fight, but for the most part, they're absent, and it felt weird, considering how their story ended and what happened to them. It was weird to me that they didn't get at least one scene of them talking to Adonis about the events that actually happened in the film. There's also a brief subplot about their daughter Amara getting into a fight at school, and that doesn't really go anywhere. And speaking of their daughter Amara, there was one shot where the character was clearly supposed to be sad and upset, but it looks like she's holding back laughter. Maybe they should have gone with a few more takes just to make sure that was right. But honestly, if things like that are my biggest complaints, that's honestly a pretty good sign that you're watching a good movie. I found myself riveted by the vast majority of the runtime. The characters and the dilemmas that they were in felt real. The things that they struggled with and the difficulty in communicating those struggles all felt real. And as always, the boxing scenes are always a real treat to watch. If you're already not a fan of this franchise, then yeah, this isn't going to win you over. But for those who already enjoy these films and enjoy watching these characters, this will hit the spot. Creed 3 gets a full shot. Next up is the new Guy Ritchie film, Operation Fortune, Ruse de Guerre, which I just have to say, before we get into the actual review, that title is just awful. There is nothing memorable about it whatsoever. Anyway, this film is about a group of spies who are sent out by a British government agency to retrieve a stolen MacGuffin before it can be sold to the highest bidder and falling into the wrong hands, and at the same time they have to find out what exactly it was that was stolen in the first place. Guy Ritchie is one of those filmmakers that a lot of people are split about, but the one thing that you can't deny is that he has his own unique voice. His films are weird, bizarrely paced, jump around erratically, are filled with tons of characters with different agendas, and can be confusing even if you're paying attention, let alone if you're not. I wouldn't say I love any of his films, but he is a unique director for sure, and when he's at the top of his game, he can make some genuinely good, solid films like Snatch. However, the problem is when he's not at the top of his game, his films can come across as a complete mess, and by and large, that's kind of what we got here. This film jumps around so much that it's really hard to get a handle on things. The first scene of the movie is literally shot and edited like it's a trailer of the movie that we're about to watch rather than the movie itself. It tries so hard to cram as much exposition as it can, but it never really gives the audience any time to breathe. This film has so many moving parts because not only do the British spies have to try to retrieve whatever was stolen and all the complications that come with that, they also have to contend with another private contractor and his men who are trying to retrieve the stolen goods, and yeah, there is a lot to juggle here, and the film doesn't always succeed at doing so. Everyone does just fine with what they're given. Jason Statham plays Jason Statham, and he's very good at playing Jason Statham, and such is the case here. Aubrey Plaza is kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes she has funny lines, and she's usually charming enough just from her presence alone, but man, some of her lines are groan-inducingly bad. Carrie Elways and Bugsy Malone are given almost nothing to do, but by far the standout performances are Josh Hartnett as the actor that the British spies end up hiring, and Hugh Grant as the eccentric billionaire. And those two have excellent chemistry with each other, and they bounce off of each other really well. So much so that I wanted to see more of their interactions. One bizarre thing that I noticed about this film that I don't typically notice is that there are times where the sound mixing in this is pretty poor. In one scene that takes place in an airport, the sounds of the airplanes were so loud that they were sometimes drowning out what the characters were saying, which in a regular film is annoying, but in an espionage film like this one, where every bit of dialogue is important, that's pretty sorry. There's even a few scenes where the film literally uses English subtitles to explain what certain characters are saying, even though they are speaking English. However, even with all of its flaws, this was a film that managed to keep my interest throughout. Maybe it was the charm of the actors they got, maybe it was the mood and vibe that the film was going for that just made me go along with it, Or maybe it was because the laughs and the good action scenes were spread out enough that I never got to linger on something that I didn't like for too long. Even the big reveal as to what everyone is chasing after and what the big evil plan is so ridiculous that you can't really take it seriously. But kind of in a good way, kind of like in those old cheesy 70s and 80s spy film kind of way. Sometimes there is charm to be found within this film's suckitude. But even still, there are a few decent action and or comedy set pieces in here that do genuinely stand out. Like the scene where Statham breaks into a house, that ends up having a good payoff, and there's a phenomenal chase scene at the end of the second act that has a funny payoff as well. And like I mentioned before, Hugh Grant and Josh Hartnett get some amusing moments trying to reenact the unbearable weight of massive talent. And funnily enough, once all the domino pieces were in place, I actually had a really fun time with the film's final half hour or so. It was a lot tighter and it was more focused. Anything fantastic? No. But just competent enough that it managed to hold my interest. So whether or not you like this film is going to depend on two things. How much tolerance you have for Guy Ritchie and his films, and how much you're willing to forgive a bad script if there's genuinely entertaining action. This one was very borderline for me because for most of the runtime it was kind of hovering in a half-empty rating range, but the pretty entertaining climax, in my opinion, makes up for its shortcomings just enough to push it over the edge. Although I will definitely understand if people can't get into this one. This is one that I would describe as perfect for a lazy evening rental. Do I wish this was better? Yes. But as far as messes go, this could have been much, much worse. Operation Fortune, Ruse de Guerre, by the tiniest of margins, gets a half-full shot. Next up is the new horror film Children of the Corn, which is the 11th film in this franchise based on the Stephen King short story. And this film in particular has been sitting on a shelf collecting dust for the last 3 years. Now, some of you might be tempted to say that, well, it was because of the COVID pandemic. That's why it took so long. But honestly, having seen the final product myself, I can assure you that the reason that this film took so long to finally seeing the light of day is because it is a stack of fecal matter masquerading as cinema. Set in a dying Nebraska farm town, all the corn crops have started dying because of all the pesticides and GMOs that they've been using. Wanting to hold the adults accountable for what they did to the future of the town, all the kids, seemingly under the influence of He Who Walks Behind the Rose, go on a rampage where they slaughter the adults. This is one of the very worst films I have ever seen in my life, and it's, as of recording, the worst film I have ever seen on the big screen. The most positive thing that I can say about this film is that director Kurt Wimmer knew enough to not put the lens cap on the screen. Actually, I take that back. I wish the lens cap was on the screen, because staring at a totally blank screen for the same amount of time would be more entertaining than this. What's the number one thing that a horror film should try to do? Be scary. I think that's pretty high on the to-do list, and yet this film fails at that very basic goal. There is no sense of mood or atmosphere to the thing. Every violent action that gets taken feels so flat, and a lot of that is because every single element of this film is incompetent. All the acting in this is abysmal, so you never, for a second, believe that these are real people, which is not helped by the writing, where the characters, as their default programming, do things that no sane, rational human being would ever do, at least not ones with survival instincts above that of a lemming. They either make decisions so baffling that they make Gilligan look enlightened by comparison, or they just stand there not doing anything, just watching the kids do their thing while they scream at them to stop. I could not tell you how many times I wanted to yell at the screen, "Do something! Anything!" The main character in particular, who out of the kindness of my heart I will not name the actress who played her, is such a dunderhead that she ignores blatant red flags that there's something wrong with the kids. Like, at one point the kids have slaughtered a pig and are using its blood to paint the walls of a giant hole they just dug. And she, after being weirded out for like 20 seconds just keeps talking to them as if what they're doing isn't in any way alarming. You know, there's a limit with how stupid you can make a main character and still have us root for them, and this film reaches that limit very early on. The editing in this is crap. There are moments where it feels like scenes are either missing or cut off too short. This film does a terrible job at establishing important plot points for later, either not doing it at all or telegraphing it so much that there is no sense of suspense. There are illogicalities in every single scene, like how a car that's had gas leaking out of its tank for over a day somehow still has gasoline inside it. How the kids somehow managed to drag a bunch of unconscious adults out to the middle of the cornfield without any kind of adult help, and how these kids, I guess, were given super strength by the monster in the cornfield. That's the only way that they would be able to do half of the things that they do in this movie, like beating a teen's face in completely simply with 2 swings. And they somehow managed to set up a complicated contraption in order to hang a man by a rope instead of just hanging him. This is all way too stupid to be taken seriously. And speaking of things that are too stupid to take seriously, when the monster is finally revealed, my word, the CG on it is absolutely terrible. And the design is pretty awful too. He looks like that grass disguise that Dana Carvey wore in The Master of Disguise. No, I'm not kidding, it really does look that unintentionally hilarious. When I first saw the big reveal, I actually started laughing. It looks utterly pathetic. And I haven't even gotten to this film's horrendous attempt at trying to go for a blatant climate change allegory. Something that it manages to botch so badly that I genuinely have no idea what side of the debate they're even on. So the adults are bad because they just want to bury the bad corn from a problem that they admittedly caused, and then take a federal subsidy for not farming corn. And the kids are good for speaking out against this and wanting to vote to try to save the farmland, but then later on the kids are bad for killing them for destroying their future, and then the solution to stopping the monster is to just burn the entire corn crop to the ground. So, yeah, in this allegory, Mother Earth is the villain, and burying the corn and getting money from the federal government for doing it is bad, but burning it is A-okay. You know, just once, I would like for writers to think through their implications when they're trying to do some kind of allegory of this nature. Honestly, this movie is so terrible, I could probably do a scene-by-scene analysis of the way this movie fails. I might actually do that someday, because this film actually made me genuinely angry. It is artless, it is pointless, it is bereft of anything resembling intrigue or fright. It is a worthless experience. I may jinx it right now, but I'm going to say it. This is the worst film of 2023. I know we still have like 10 months to go, but I know, deep in my heart and soul, that there is not going to be a worse film released this year. Children of the Corn gets an empty shot. Next up is the new Spanish language film, Eres Tú, or the English title, Love at First Kiss. The film follows Javier, a man who has a unique gift, being able to look into the future and see an entire romantic relationship play out from the very first kiss. Knowing the relationships that he starts won't work, he abandons any sense of commitment. But all that changes when he kisses his best friend's girl and discovers that she may finally be the one for him. The film actually has a pretty good premise, kind of mixing a little bit of about time with next. And thankfully for a romance film, it actually has something that a lot of other romances don't. Excellent chemistry between the two romantic leads. The way they talk to each other, the way they share physical intimacy, the way they look at each other. I can really truly believe that these characters are in love. The characters aren't, the most interesting or well-written characters or anything like that, but they're likable enough, and they got some talented actors to play them. And the utilization of his powers is kind of an interesting angle, as the film kind of explores what it means to know exactly how a relationship is going to work out, and how that might affect how we treat it, and the moral dilemma of knowing that you would be a better pick for your best friend's girl than he is, and how you might handle something like that. So, yeah, overall, I was ready to give this a pretty solid recommendation, but then the film's third act happens. And it was at that point that I was left genuinely scratching my head as to what this film was even trying to do. Unfortunately, I can't really get into the specifics of what makes the ending suck without spoiling it, but in an attempt to be as vague as possible, it kind of makes a lot of the preceding film feel pointless. Like you're setting up one thing, and then you kind of go, no, that was actually wrong the whole time. And that's a shame because had the ending been changed, I'd probably be calling this a charming, decent little romance worth checking out with your beau. But unfortunately, for this kind of film, the ending is really important. And I just don't buy the resolution of where these characters end up. At all. I guess it was done in an attempt to be subversive, but being subversive in and of itself is not a positive. You need to know when to utilize it, when it's best for the story. Not that it matters much in this case because it was telegraphed so blatantly that I could see precisely where it was going, even though it was trying to go the unorthodox route. Again, I wish I could go into more detail, but unfortunately I can't without spoilers. So I'll just end with this. Sometimes the good old-fashioned predictable ending is better than the unexpected subversive ending, if you don't know how to do the latter properly. While I can't say it was a complete failure, because I did find the first hour or so charming and likable, but this is another case of a film that just fumbles at the goal line, and that ultimately makes it kind of disappointing. Love at First Kiss gets a half-empty shot. And our final film tonight is the new Irish folk horror film, Unwelcome. A film about a young English couple who, following an attack in their flat in London, move into a rural Irish town to find some peace and quiet, but find themselves at odds with the local family, and at the same time, also discover that there may be a horde of redcaps, or little goblin-like creatures, who live in the nearby forest. The film itself kinda has a slow build-up as it spends about an hour establishing this married couple and trying to build this kinda feud and rivalry that grows between them and this specific family, and it's obvious that the film is building at least part of this feud as a result of xenophobia, which is definitely old hat by this point, but at least the film has the courtesy to not spell it out. The married couple is kind of a nice couple. They're not well defined, but they're decent enough, and you don't want anything bad to happen to them. However, there are definitely a few moments where the husband feels really out of character. Like, the film establishes that the attack that happened at the start of the film was a direct result of him mouthing off and cussing out some hoodlums, and yet later on in the film he does exactly that to a family that is clearly not stable. But yeah, in the first hour of the film, not only does the film need to establish this feud, but they also have to establish who the redcaps are, and the build-up to these creatures that comes with that. So as a result, the first hour kind of drags and feels uneven. But then the film reaches a certain turning point, about an hour into the film, and this is when the film actually gets good. We finally get to see the redcaps, and they look fantastic. They're a combination of practical effects and motion capture, so they actually look really impressive. Like they're really there in the scene interacting with the actors. And in an age where so many filmmakers will opt to just CG all the creatures, that extra effort here goes a long way in my book. I wouldn't necessarily say the film is scary, but it does manage to have a very subtle bit of sense of humor about itself. Kinda diffidently aware of its basic setup and campy elements, but takes itself just seriously as it needs to without going overboard. The action from the climax is done well. It's well staged, interesting, appropriately gory, and keeps you on your toes. So had the build-up been handled better, I'd probably be giving this a real hearty recommendation, because the last 30 to 40 minutes really works. But it does have that opening hour. So I would say if you do decide to check this one out, stick with it. It does improve the further into the film it gets. The characters are fine for the most part, it's got a decent atmosphere to the whole thing, and like I said, the effects on the redcaps are just fun. Unwelcome gets a half-full shot. And now, here's a quick recap of what I thought of the films reviewed for the week of March 3rd, 2023. A full shot for Creed 3. While the script could have been more developed in some parts, this is still a great time, and a strong directorial debut for Michael B. Jordan. The film is currently in wide release. A barely half-full shot for Operation Fortune, Ruse, Guerre. Like many of Guy Ritchie's films, his story structure is a complete mess, but he manages to deliver just enough action thrills in the third act to satisfy fans of his films. The film is currently in wide release. An empty shot for Children of the Corn, a ridiculous, nonsensical, and fright-free horror film that is proof that maybe we should leave this franchise to the crows once and for all. The film is currently in limited release before heading to Shudder on March 21st. A half-empty shot for Love at First Kiss, a film that is actually a charming and delightful romance for about the first hour until it completely fumbles with a terrible third act. The film is currently available for streaming on Netflix. And finally, a half-full shot for Unwelcome, a film that is uneven and takes a bit too long getting moving, but the pretty fun climax mixed in with some excellent practical effects makes this one worth watching for fans of folk horror films. The film is set for a digital release March 14th. So easily the best film of the week is Creed 3. One of the best films of the year so far, and a real crowd pleaser to boot. Just, no matter what you decide to watch this week, whatever you do, stay away from Children of the Corn. It really is astonishing just how unwatchable it actually turned out. And remember, if you want to see my early thoughts of any film I watch, or to read more of my reviews, make sure to check out my Letterboxd account. The link is in the description below. That's it for this week. Next time, Ghostface makes his way to the Big Apple in Scream 6, and Adam Driver battles dinosaurs in the new sci-fi action film 65. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Have a good day, and I'll see you next weekend.